Donald Trump is now the president of the United States. And whether you like it or not, it's a fact. It's the truth. It is what it is. It shouldn't impact your ability to get up every single day and chase your dreams. But you know what's not being spoken about? It's how all these policies or these potential things are going to actually impact you in your daily life. How are they going to impact you on your journey as you're building your companies? Or if you have a company right now, how is it actually going to affect you? So I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty right now. Whether it's taxes or tariffs on imports or the health policies or the deregulation of employment laws or all these other policies that right now might impact your life, we're going to get into it. And I want to try to just give you my 2 cents on how I see it and how they could impact you on your journey. So you know what I think one of the biggest wins that is going to happen over the next few years is a Robert F. Kennedy, who's a huge advocate, also a personal brand, but a huge advocate for going against Big Pharma, going against what actually is on the back of these like cereal that you're feeding your kids, right? If you go to like an international market, they have clean label ingredients on the back of that cereal box. But yet when you look at it here, in the United States, it's filled with all this artificial chemicals and dyes, yet they don't change it because there's no regulation on it. And now he's making a huge reform to change those policies. He's also going against media and Big Pharma on how they're driving the food pyramid. You look at it, it's totally upside down and has been for years. But who writes those checks? So if Big Pharma is writing those checks to the media outlets, and the media outlets are driving what is being told, and who are the people behind certain restriction governments like FDAs, etc., that are actually creating the policies, you have now an advocate, somebody who's fighting and who's going to be a great voice for the things that actually matter, for preventive food, for things that don't cause disease or trying to stay ahead of it instead of having to treat it with a chemical or a drug. You want to be ahead of it. And so from his positioning of what he thinks is going to make the biggest impact is going to be eating right, ensuring that the foods that are manufactured are clean. They're not filled with chemicals and artificial ingredients. And that there isn't this big push where pharma is trying to drive the drugs to be able to replace what's happening with all these sicknesses and illnesses that are caused by the foods that you're actually eating. And so that huge reform, and I know many people that are pushing in this space, from Cali Means to Robert F. Kennedy and so many other friends that have actually are big initiatives out there trying to go up against brands like Kellogg's and others to recreate what those panels look like in the US to match what's happening international. Why does the US have a completely different panel than overseas? And honestly, it's because there's different initiatives, different requirements, and different people sitting behind writing the policies. And so I'm super, super excited for what he's going to be able to do for the health and wellness industry. So like one of the big things that I see with Trump is that he is going to now be on the side of the business entrepreneur, right? When you look at the person that has a mom and pop business or the person that actually has to pay those taxes, him being able to keep the Tax and Jobs Act and keep the lower tax rates in place allows more money to go into your pocket, which creates more stimulus to the environment, to the government, to the entire infrastructure of the United States, and at the same time, actually away from the government. He takes the money away from the government, puts it back in your pocket. So the whole entire thing where he's reducing the taxes for even people like me, where I'm a manufacturer, and reducing my tax liability from a 28 or a 30% tax rate down to a 15% for manufacturing locally is humongous. That impacts the amount of people that I can hire, the cost that goes to the products that I create that ultimately are under the brands that are ultimately going to be sold to you as a consumer. And so a lot of the stimulus that is going to happen from a tax reduction for both the everyday consumer on the tax rates that they pay, or the actual businesses and where they're able to reinvest their money into growing their businesses is going to be so amazing, and it's actually going to create a big impact in the US. On the flip side, he's also saying, hey, anything that is being manufactured overseas, right? If you're buying or supplying anything from China and you're importing that, we're going to tax it. We're going to add a 60%, maybe even 100% tax rate on that product. So say you're a drop shipper or you're a brand and you're sourcing an ingredient or a component of a product you create to the end consumer here in the US. Now you're going to pay more for that product coming from international market, right? Coming from China. So say you pay right now $10 for a product from China and you're selling it online for $30. But now you have to pay $16 from China. What are you going to do? Are you still selling it for $30? You can't, because your margins go down, right? So what ends up happening is that, yes, he is going to tax the imports coming from China, but what ends up happening is stimulates the purchasing for more US-based goods. And so that will then spark and drive the US manufacturers and production facility as well as the US to actually start purchasing again from us, stimulating again our economy. But in the short term, it will impact the sourcing and will also disrupt a lot of the businesses that are out there just trying to create that delta from China's supply to resell to the consumer and then take those points right in the interchange. That will disrupt that business model. So if you're in it, you should try to really analyze how it's going to impact your business. If you're paying now 60% more for a product that you're sourcing from China, what are your numbers? What do your margins actually look like? Right? And even myself, right? We're a manufacturer and we're importing a lot of these raw materials from China, or we're importing them from some suppliers that source from China. And so what's going to end up happening is the time that it takes for those ingredients to then be sourced from local manufacturers or local manufacturers to increase their capacity of production to meet the demand that is going to be coming from the US bases instead of offshore importing because of the price difference is going to then also, one, stimulate again the US, but that is going to take some time, right? You're going to give those manufacturers and those production facilities time to scale up their production, reinvest into the infrastructure to be able to produce more at a more efficient rate. So over time, the benefit's going to be there, but in the short term, you're going to see higher prices and an impact on supply chain. So Trump is also talking about capping interest rates, right? So credit card debt, if you have a credit card, the average is like 21%, which is absurd, right? That means every month, if you're carrying $1,000 balance, you're paying an additional $200, right? So if you're only making your $200 payment or your baseline, you're never getting out of debt, which is causing this massive balloon of debt across all of the consumers and users and people that actually possess credit cards. And so if you're capping credit card interest rates at 10% from a consumer's perspective, right? So from your perspective or my perspective, it's actually not horrible, right? Somebody's giving you the ability to use their money and then you're paying 10% interest on that money. But what happens from the lender's perspective? The lender is basically gonna say, well, the risk factor of that actual consumer, I don't feel comfortable with the risk profile of that person to give them access to capital or minimize the amount of capital that I'm giving him access to because he's too risky, or he might not have the ability to pay me back, or they lower the total amount of available credit. They don't want to take the risk on you, right? So now the lender's saying, I'm only going to make 10% minus all these other fees and operational expenses and all that stuff that I have to incur. I don't want to give the average person, the ability to use a credit card or to take out, a loan for a specific amount. So it's going to push up these like Payday or money, merchant cash advance or other quick money lenders that are more on that higher risk profile side. And then those rates are going to skyrocket on the other side, right? So they might be in the 30-40% range. And that's way more aggressive. But if you're in a spot that you need that capital, I can relate. Like when I was scaling Master Food Lab, I didn't want to bring in outside capital. I didn't want to sell equity in the company, but I needed to continue to grow. I needed to buy equipment. I needed to hire. I needed to pay for additional expansion. And all of those things took money. In order for me to get there, I needed capital, right? I couldn't wait for me to get the next customer and then pay to be able to make, the 10, 15, 20% margin to then be able to reinvest it. It takes way too long. So when you need that money in, you got to find a resource. I had like 2 or 3 different merchant cash advances that were sitting between 30 and 40% on interest. I think I even had one at a point where it was like 47% interest rate, which is absurd. And it was like every day I was trying to get rid of it. But they were like, well, you're scaling and you have this other loan out. And so technically I can only give you X amount of dollars, but you got to pay this much in interest for me to give it to you. It was almost like kind of like a take it or leave it scenario. So you'll get a lot more of those that actually happen. But if you have a solid risk profile where like you are able to pay back your debt, you do have the revenue to be able to pay, you will be able to access credit card debt and have a cap of a 10%. So that is a beautiful thing that could happen for the everyday consumer because again, you're putting more money into your pocket. So it's less taxes that you have to pay, more money in your pocket, more stimulus to the US from a production, manufacturing, and consumption perspective, which stimulates the economy, which then at the end of the day for this credit card cap, if there's a 10% cap on interest rates from credit card companies, now the amount that these localized companies or credit card companies or debt companies can make from you on a loan are going to be much less, or at least controlled in a way, which is going to allow you to have more capital, have more ability to actually utilize the money that you're making smartly. Taking you out of debt at a 20-something% interest rate is pretty tough. And that's why the average American is sitting on a solid amount of debt and it's bigger than it's ever been. So another huge component is when Trump announced DOGE, right? The Department of Governmental Efficiency. And he said, hey, I want Elon and Vivek two private sector entrepreneurs running this division. And the implications, the momentum, even when you look at the cryptocurrency Dodge, right, that shit skyrocketed. And it's because you're now giving people who are fighting for the free speech, you're fighting to go against this media that is being controlled, whether it's from big pharma money or from other people to control the messaging that they're actually putting out in the world. You now go against what the average consumer, the everyday American, is supposed to experience in this life. You want them to have the opportunity to know what's true, what's right. And you have two people that have fought to try to advance the private sector when it comes to free speech, when it comes to the policies, when it comes to actually caring about the American and like what they're doing with their lives and the information that they're given to control. That means government spending is going to be cut. They're talking about almost like $2 trillion. I mean, there is tons of momentum around Elon Musk and Vivek, who honestly, from my perspective, when you're in the trenches as an entrepreneur and you're dealing with employees and you're building companies and you're servicing the community or actual like economic stimulus of like people consuming or interacting, you have your hand on the pulse, right? So you really know what is happening with that everyday person. And I hope and I believe that they're able to impact it from an unbiased perspective, just trying to get to the truth, right? Trying to eliminate all of the fraudulent activity, the government officials that might be getting paid to say certain things or control certain things or implement certain things. We don't actually know what's behind the curtain, but just from the excitement that's around these two guys getting in there and the no BS kind of tactics that all of these guys possess, from Trump to Musk to Vivek, I believe that there's going to be a real aggressive kind of no hands held back approach to fixing what is going on with Dodge. Another component is actually the deregulation of employment laws. So when you look at this one, so I'm going to look at this obviously by sitting in the middle, because I honestly think that this one has to be managed just like the schools funding. This one has to be managed very, very, very carefully. And when you think about it, all he's trying to do is stimulate the US economy and just pull back a little bit on the restrictions, right? Just a little bit of that strict kind of like overly aggressive control measures that were way one-sided and not in the favor of the business operator, the entrepreneur, or the business owner, right? And so a lot of his initiatives are driving towards you as an entrepreneur or the business owner to try to stimulate, support you, and get more of our opportunities out of the United States. So one thing is the actual hourly wages and overtime. The other one is the anti-discrimination. The other one is work safety and OSHA, right? And when you look at every single one of those, there is this beautiful line you have to balance, right? You can't ease up off the gas completely because then there's no safety for the employees. But you can't be so strict that you put the employer in a position that the management of all these safety regulations and components is so crazy that it costs them so much and it puts all this red tape before even being able to actually execute on the business that you're trying to run. And so there is this beautiful balance that has to happen. Again, with the anti-discrimination or with the labor and overtime and minimum wage requirements, right? That could impact the ability for someone to make a certain amount of money, and could also impact the business owner from being forced to have to pay a certain amount of money for a talent or a service that honestly doesn't garner that value. And so I'm a big believer in that you should be paid in direct proportion to the value that you're delivering for whatever it is that you're doing on this earth. And if you're not happy hourly rate that you're making, or the job that you're in, or the amount that you're making for the value that you're providing, you should take a step back and you should ask yourself, is what you're doing actually that valuable? And if it's not, just be honest with yourself and say, hey, you know what? I need to level up. I'm not providing the value that garners what I expect myself to be receiving. And so for that whole minimum wage thing, like if you're chasing these minimum wage jobs, or it's something that you're trying to push for a $15, $16, $18 growing minimum wage, the impact of that on businesses for a very simple production or career path might not garner that. And so that's why I believe this entire conversation, right, is really important, because you can't go to one side and you can't go to the other. You have to find the beautiful balance between both. And I hope that that's what's going to be able to be done here, because if he does it right, and if they do it right, they will be able to strike the balance between giving real power and opportunity to the business owner, but then also putting the employee or the person that is on the other side the opportunity to be effective and make the money that they deserve. But honestly, these policies aren't going to truly impact you on your journey if you don't let them. you need to always find a way on how to utilize them into your favor. There's nothing that's gonna always just be teeing it up and making this beautiful yellow brick road that you gotta follow in life. The journey's gonna be tough. You gotta know that you have to get up every single day, chase your dreams, and get up every single time you get knocked down. So I created this video right here where I help you create the next $1 billion brand without being a celebrity.